Most individuals are unaware of a subtle, nearly undetectable behavior that dominates a significant portion of modern human interactions: the persistent urge to constantly account for oneself. This habit appears innocuous, even courteous. After all, providing a rationale for your choices, feelings, absences, or shifts in mood might be perceived as empathy or consideration toward others. However, underlying this ceaseless need for self-vindication is a far more profound and troubling reality: an unresolved psychological injury. Carl Gustav Jung, a towering figure in analytical psychology, identified this pattern as a clear indicator of a disconnection from one's true self. In his view, the continuous effort to persuade others about your identity, your inner experience, and the reasons behind your actions actually demonstrates a state of self-neglect. The individual who perpetually explains themselves is often subconsciously seeking something they were denied: the fundamental permission to exist. This conduct frequently originates in environments characterized by emotional invalidation. These settings, often within the family structure, systematically discredit the child's subjective reality. Phrases like, "That's ridiculous," "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," "There's no good reason for you to feel like that." The internal message absorbed is devastating. My feelings only hold value if they are understood, sanctioned, or permitted by others. Over time, this conviction morphs into an unseen cage, trapping the individual into depending on the comprehension of others to affirm their own internal experience. When an adult feels compelled to justify their actions, they are unconsciously striving to prevent abandonment, judgment, or rejection. They operate under the belief that if their reasons are understood, they might escape criticism, detachment, or dismissal. It is a desperate effort to manage the perceptions of others as a way to secure acceptance and emotional safety. Yet, this relentless exertion comes at a substantial cost: the individual's psychological autonomy. By prioritizing external approval, the person begins to disregard their inner authority. Their actions are no longer driven by genuine belief, but by the need to offer an explanation to avoid being misunderstood. Their emotions are no longer experienced authentically. Instead, they are rationalized to sidestep the discomfort of being viewed negatively. Progressively, they cease living for themselves and start performing for others, participating in an endless drama where the audience holds more sway than the main actor. Jung recognized this phenomenon as a primary impediment on the path toward individuation, the profound process through which a person genuinely realizes their potential. The harsh truth remains: as long as the continuous necessity to justify oneself persists, true internal freedom is unattainable. This is because compulsive explanation is a highly sophisticated form of subservience. With every justification, the individual implicitly states, "I can only be if you grant me leave." This video aims to help dismantle this ingrained conditioning, offering a deep investigation into why so many individuals are caught in the trap of self-justification, and the transformative outcomes when they finally embrace silence. When the choice is made to stop explaining, a radical shift occurs. The inner self, previously bent on seeking outside approval, starts to assume a new bearing, one rooted in internal authority. This change alters everything. The drive to justify oneself goes far beyond simple good manners or a wish to be understood. It points to a psychic injury deeply lodged in the very core of identity. Jung recognized that this compulsion for self-explanation isn't merely a behavioral tic, it's a symptom. It mirrors an older, unconscious conviction that one's existence is only valuable when affirmed by external sources. This wound is established early, typically during childhood, in environments where the subjective experience of the child is constantly undermined. When a child expresses sorrow and is dismissed as being theatrical, when anger is met with labels like difficult or disrespectful, or when fear is greeted with mockery or scorn, they start to internalize a dangerous message. What I feel is incorrect. I must rely solely on the reactions of others. As a defense mechanism, the child learns to seek comprehension as a means of safety. They discover that by thoroughly explaining their feelings, they might avoid being punished, ignored, or made fun of. This initiates a persistent pattern carried into adulthood, the need to justify every emotion, choice, and action, as if a compelling argument is prerequisite to the right to feel and simply be. At the heart of this injury is the surrender of internal authority. The individual no longer perceives their experience as intrinsically valid. They become reliant on external validation to determine if their internal reality is legitimate. This creates a psychological state of subservience, where self-worth is not generated internally, but is instead built upon their reflection in the eyes of others. It's crucial to understand that this pattern operates unconsciously. Often, those caught in this loop don't even realize their constant efforts to persuade others that their feelings are logical, their decisions are reasoned, and their behavior is well motivated. Yet, behind every rationale lurks a hidden anxiety, the fear of being rejected simply for who they are. Jung asserted that every person must, at some juncture, confront this inherited inner framework. Until they do, their operations will continue to be governed by the standards, critiques, and expectations of others, frequently those internalized from childhood authority figures, such as guardians, instructors, or religious figures. The person becomes a mere reflection of what others would endorse, rather than their authentic self. This persistent self-justification is ultimately a form of self-abandonment, the act of compromising one's own truth to make it more digestible to others. The process of healing begins precisely at this point, recognizing that permission to exist is no longer required, and that your emotions, regardless of how intense, complex, or unconventional they may seem, do not need a rationale to be worthy of space. However, this realization is often accompanied by pain. When the person begins to embrace silence instead of the need to explain, the ensuing quiet can be unsettling, exposing an internal void caused by the lack of a solid internal authority. This is exactly what Jung addressed with one of his psychological cornerstones, the establishment of internal authority. Compulsive self-justification is more than a mere coping mechanism. It represents an ongoing, corrosive process of self-betrayal. It's a silent, often unseen act of disloyalty that deeply harms one's integrity. Carl Jung recognized that every instance an individual alters their expression to avoid displeasure, conceals their feelings to maintain superficial peace, or compromises their decisions to sidestep scrutiny, they are withdrawing from their authentic self. They are, in effect, abandoning their own truth. This internal compromise doesn't manifest as an explosive, obvious rupture with the self. Instead, it occurs gradually and subtly in daily life. It happens when you fake laughter at something you don't find funny just to appear agreeable, when you agree to something against your wishes to avoid being labeled as uncooperative, when you downplay sadness as mere tiredness because you fear being perceived as a burden, or when you rationalize anger as logical thinking to avoid seeming immature. With every small surrender made in the pursuit of external acceptance, a piece of the soul is left behind. Jung identified this behavior as a direct manifestation of the ego becoming disconnected from the self. The ego, whose proper role is to be the functional center of consciousness, instead becomes subservient to external validation. It constantly reconfigures itself to align with what others expect or desire to see. Through this perpetual adjustment, the individual loses contact with their inner core. They stop trusting their own gut feelings, doubt the validity of their inner life, and question their most genuine motivations. Inner confidence is replaced by pervasive doubt. This trajectory of self-abandonment is treacherous because it is often socially rewarded. People who are easily adaptable, who readily offer explanations, who avoid conflict, and who are generally easy to manage are frequently praised. However, this manufactured harmony often masks a profound emotional exhaustion, the fatigue of living for others, while being unable to hear one's own voice. Jung contended that this kind of internal division is a major underlying factor in neuroses. When the ego drifts too far from the self, the symbolic core of psychological wholeness, various symptoms emerge: persistent anxiety, feelings of existential emptiness, difficulty making firm choices, and diminished self-esteem. Why does this happen? Because the soul is crying out to be acknowledged, but has been silenced for the sake of social conformance. Fundamentally, the core issue is, whose life is this? As long as you are continually seeking permission to feel, think, or act, your existence will be reduced to a performance, an edited, censored version of your true self. You will forever be a supporting character in someone else's story, never the author of your own narrative. The only way to break this cycle of self-betrayal is through the reclamation of internal authority. This means developing the inner strength to uphold your truth even when it isn't understood, even when it creates friction, and even when it defies expectations. This is the true beginning of individuation, becoming whole, even if it involves disappointing others. But how does one nurture this internal authority? How do you sever the dependence on external comprehension to affirm your identity? How do you maintain silence when pressured for justification? This is what Jung addresses with his concept of individuation, which we will explore now, because only when this authority is fully established does silence cease to be an absence and become a powerful affirmation. For Carl Jung, authentic psychological liberation isn't derived from social acceptance or external validation. It springs from cultivating internal authority. This idea, central to his individuation theory, signifies an individual's capacity to affirm their subjective experience without reliance on others' approval. It is the pivotal moment when the internal monologue shifts from asking, "Will they understand how I feel?" to firmly declaring, "Whether they understand or not is irrelevant. This is true for me." Internal authority is the direct inverse of compulsive self-explanation. While the latter is rooted in deep-seated insecurity, the necessity to rationalize every action for acceptance, internal authority originates from the profound conviction that your personal truth is non-negotiable. This shift is not merely intellectual. It is existential, representing a complete change of psychological axis. The psyche's center of gravity is relocated from the periphery of external approval back to the core of the self, the seat of wholeness. However, this transition demands considerable courage. By refusing to justify themselves, individuals directly confront the primal fears of abandonment, judgment, and exclusion. Jung noted that individuation requires crossing the desert of inner solitude, the point where, for the first time, one holds a firm no without guilt, changes one's mind without offering a rationale, or concludes a conversation without explanation. This is done not out of arrogance, but from the simple understanding that one owes no one a reason for their existence. Nurturing this authority does not imply becoming rigid or shutting down dialogue, quite the opposite. It means you no longer have to plead for comprehension. Instead, you present your truth as a gift, rather than a desperate request for approval. Communication transforms from a performance into an authentic expression. It represents the critical difference between speaking with the goal of being approved versus speaking with the intent of being true. In day-to-day life, internal authority manifests through small but significant actions, maintaining silence when provoked. The firmness of stating, "That doesn't resonate with me," without feeling the need to elaborate. The refusal to engage in emotional power dynamics where constant justification is demanded. And critically, the capacity to endure the discomfort of being misunderstood while remaining psychologically intact. Jung believed this to be among the most crucial junctures of the psychological voyage, the moment the individual ceases outsourcing their self-worth and begins to recognize it as something generated internally. This shift is both symbolic and potent, signifying the break from the old, conditioned self, the one that lives to please, and the emergence of a new self, rooted, self-governing, and whole. Yet, this new posture is not universally welcomed. In fact, the silence emanating from internal authority often creates unease. People who benefited from your previous insecurity lose their leverage. Manipulators feel challenged. Relationships built on unbalanced power dynamics begin to fracture. This is exactly why, when the compulsive explaining stops, everything begins to change. Silence, when it stems from integrity rather than evasion, ranks among the most potent forces in the human psyche. Jung grasped this with stark clarity, viewing silence not as the absence of a response, but as the presence of authority. When an individual ceases their compulsive self-justification, they are not merely sidestepping conflict or ending a discussion. They are deactivating an entire psychological control system that has thrived on their insecurity. This particular brand of silence is profoundly disconcerting. For those accustomed to you bending, explaining, or correcting yourself, the absence of justification is often perceived as defiance, and to an extent, it is a revolutionary act. However, it's not an immature rebellion that screams for attention. It's a silent revolution, an implicit declaration. I am not accountable to anyone for my identity. Manipulative individuals who rely on planting seeds of doubt in others start losing their advantage. Emotional manipulation is only effective when a perceived vulnerability exists. The fear of being misunderstood, rejected, or disappointing others. Manipulation requires a reactive response. But the secure silence that flows from internal authority is like an unmoving bulwark. It refuses to react, rationalize, or play along. It simply is. This immediately undermines any attempt at control. Furthermore, relationships that have always hinged upon your subservience, be it emotional, intellectual, or behavioral, begin to reveal their true nature: fragile, unequal, and founded on imbalance. When you stop providing explanations, you annul the unspoken pact of inferiority. You shift from being someone who needs to be accepted to someone who already accepts themselves. This changes everything. Some people will inevitably withdraw. This should not be interpreted as a failure, but as a necessary realignment. Your silence acts as a natural filter. It unmasks those who were genuinely connected to you by affinity, versus those who were only present because you were easily controlled. Jung stated that the process of individuation frequently necessitates ruptures. This distancing is not a penalty. It is liberation. By ceasing to justify your presence, your boundaries, and your choices, you begin to attract relationships anchored in mutual respect, rather than fear or codependence. However, you must be prepared to confront your own anxiety. The part of you that spent decades learning that understanding equals value will fiercely resist. It will urge you to revert to justifying yourself, begging you to make an exception, just this once. It is in these moments that silence becomes a spiritual discipline, a deliberate act of maintaining wholeness, even when facing significant discomfort. Therefore, silence is not merely the cessation of words. It is the affirmation of one's being. It is the absolute refusal to put your identity up for debate. The more you sustain this silence, the more it evolves into a presence that radiates authority, demands respect without needing to be loud, and establishes boundaries without confrontation. A presence that requires no external approval to exist. Crucially, the impact of silence extends beyond your external relationships. It initiates a deep internal process: integration. When you stop justifying yourself, you begin to truly listen to yourself. When you stop rationalizing your emotions, you start to feel them fully. This is the genesis of genuine transformation, as external silence creates the necessary space for internal listening. There is an inherent magnetism to a person who feels no necessity to explain their existence, a quality that cannot be fabricated or forced. This quality is psychological integrity, the state of being someone who no longer barters their core essence to conform to external demands. Jung considered this integrity to be one of the most mature expressions of the individuation process. It occurs when the individual not only grasps their truth but actively upholds it, without wavering, guilt, or most importantly, the need for external validation. An integrated person doesn't beg for acceptance. They communicate and express their truth. Crucially, they do not feel the need to convince anyone, because they operate from the foundation that their existence does not require a rationale. Their communication flows from a secure internal center, not from a hidden deficiency. This fundamentally transforms how they are perceived by others. The external world tends to treat individuals with greater respect when they demonstrate self-respect. And self-respect begins at the point of refusing to negotiate what is essential about oneself. Psychological integrity should not be mistaken for rigidity. It signifies coherence, the ability to maintain an internal line of truth, even when facing external pressure. It manifests when you detect an inner discomfort in a situation, and even if you cannot rationally articulate it, you trust your feeling. You are not obligated to provide evidence or construct elaborate arguments. You simply state, "That does not sit right with me," and that declaration is sufficient. This stance, seemingly simple, is truly revolutionary in a society where most people live severed from themselves, where decisions are made based on the opinions of others, where emotions are suppressed for fear of seeming too sensitive, and where personal boundaries are violated with forced smiles to avoid being labeled as difficult. Integrity is the antithesis of this conditioning. It is the practice of being whole, of refusing to fragment oneself for the sake of pleasing others, of not concealing one's reality to prevent conflict. Jung understood that profound transformation is not achieved through acquiring more knowledge or theories, but by embodying a new posture toward life. This posture begins with the refusal to justify. Every act of compulsive justification carries an underlying insecurity. Am I enough? The integrated person has ceased asking this question. They know they are enough, even if the world suggests otherwise. Here lies the paradox. The less you seek approval, the more respect you command. Integrity possesses genuine weight, density, and presence. This is why a centered individual can, without uttering a single word, redefine the dynamics of a space. They don't need to prove anything. Their internal coherence already speaks volumes. Such individuals do not ask for space. They occupy it. They do not react out of insecurity. They act out of alignment. But there is a vital prerequisite. This integrity is only accessible when you cease self-betrayal, when you stop tailoring yourself for acceptance, and grant yourself permission to feel, choose, and act, even if you are misunderstood. This requires discipline, present moment awareness, and self-knowledge. But above all, it demands the courage to assume responsibility for your own existence, without placing blame elsewhere or outsourcing your inherent value. When this integrity takes root, the consequences are far-reaching. Relationships evolve. Your professional stance clarifies. Your self-perception becomes sharper. Anxiety diminishes. The need to micromanage others' thoughts evaporates, because you shift from living to be understood to living to be true. However, there is an even deeper consequence, an intangible quality you begin to project. When you stop explaining yourself, you start radiating a new energy, that of someone in command of their inner self. This energy is subconsciously felt by everyone in your orbit. This marks the invisible, crucial shift. The world begins treating you as someone non-negotiable. When an individual makes the decision to stop justifying themselves, the change is not only internal, but extends to their entire surroundings. It is as if a new energetic frequency is being broadcast. They no longer convey the message, "Please try to understand me," but rather emanate the firm conviction, "I know who I am, and I do not require your endorsement." The external world invariably adjusts its response. Jung understood that the human psyche reacts strongly to energy, presence, and internal structure, far more than to mere rational arguments. The person who constantly strives to be understood projects an aura of submission and doubt. Conversely, the person who has ceased self-explanation radiates strength, clarity, and authority. This is not about becoming pompous. It is about finally achieving psychological wholeness. People begin to listen differently. Relationships built on fundamental imbalance cease to hold meaning. Dynamics where you were consistently the submissive, predictable, or easily controlled party simply fall apart. This dissolution occurs not because you initiated a conflict, but because you are no longer available to play that role. Silence fundamentally reconfigures your relationships because it communicates, non-verbally, what you once had to beg for. It affirms, I am not here to be molded. I am here to be. From this position, you start to attract a distinct caliber of connection relationships that are deeper, more authentic, and genuinely aligned with the person you have become. Respect is an inside-out process. The critical first step is precisely to discontinue the justification of your own existence. However, this journey necessitates continuous presence and vigilance. In moments of uncertainty, the ingrained impulse to explain will resurface. Yielding might seem safer or easier. It is in these vulnerable moments that you must remember the power of your choice. Every time you hold back an unnecessary explanation, you reaffirm your true self. You cement your integrity. You claim your rightful space in the world, not as someone pleading for acceptance, but as someone who is already certain of their belonging. So reflect now. What is the single most frequent explanation you offer that, deep down, you know you no longer wish to give? Perhaps it pertains to your emotions, your personal boundaries, or simply your style of being. Write it down. This act is more than a mere catharsis. It is a conscious turning point. And if this message has provided challenge or inspiration, do not keep it to yourself. Give the video a like, share it with those who tend to over-explain, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching and see you next time.